Hi, everyone. It's Alec Crawford, your host for the AI Risk Reward podcast. And our guest today is Javier Tordable, CEO and founder of Pauling.AI. Welcome, Javier.
Thank you so much, Alec. Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, great to see you. And, our theme is AI and drug discovery today, which is super awesome. And I think the medical field is a place where AI can really help humanity going forward, much more than making haiku with ChatGPT for sure. Um, but let's say I want to rewind time a little bit here and go back to when you were getting your PhD, which you didn't finish, your ABD. But tell us a little bit about that, what you were working on.
Yeah, so my background is all in technology. I actually, so my training was computer science and
Hmm.
mathematics as well. I studied both degrees, and then I enrolled in a PhD program in mathematics. And I was studying graph zeta functions, which is
Mm.
actually a very interesting topic by itself. But it's been almost 20 years. Um, but most of my career has been within the context of tech. So I actually dropped out, went to work for Microsoft, and then I spent a couple of years there, and then left, joined Google, and I spent 16 years total at Google, which was. It was a great experience. I have, nothing but positive things to say about the company. I had a chance to work in a lot of different things, a lot of different teams. I built lots of software. But about 4 or 5 years ago, I decided that I wanted a switch. I actually had, I told people I had, the most fun job you could possibly imagine. I was working as a technical director within the office of the CTO, and I was working in media and entertainment,
Mm.
working with basically all the big video game companies in the world. Many of them were customers of Google Cloud back then, and I was helping them use Google technology and AI to make their video games.
Wow.
So spent some time working with EA and Nintendo and many others. So that was a lot of fun, but decided to make a switch, and I've spent the past 5 years or so within the life sciences ecosystem. The first 3 years or so as part of Google, kind of exploring different ways that that Google and myself could contribute to improving quality of care and bringing new medicines to market and so on. And the last year and a half as CEO of Pauling, we're basically focusing on enabling scientists to find new molecules, new therapeutics faster and cheaper than they can today.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a minute. But first, go back to Google. You mentioned Scott Pemberthy at Google as a particularly influential
Yeah.
mentor. How is he able to help you?
Yeah, so Scott was actually one of my managers back when I was in Google Cloud. He's a great guy. There was one thing that he used to say all the time that resonated with me, and I still keep it up to this day, which was, do epic things, right? Do epic stuff. And I think it's, if you think about our careers, right, many of us may have inherent limiting beliefs that don't necessarily acknowledge, and it's a good idea, I think, to sometimes step out a little bit and think, well, what could I possibly be doing that is more relevant and more impactful than what I'm doing today, right? And one of the things that Scott was always very good at is kind of thinking outside of the box and trying to elevate where we see ourselves in the future, right? Where we see ourselves going. And I think that was very useful at the time, when I was kind of thinking, well, how could I 10x my impact, right? We all have same 24 hours of the day, right? So many times it comes down to like thinking a little bit beyond what we're used to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, 10x is a super important concept. I've talked to a number of people about that. They're like, well, I want to grow my company a little bit or whatever. I'm like, all right, let's think about how would you 10x that, right? Like that's a very powerful way of thinking about it. Um, and you also mentioned Isaac Asimov's Foundation, credible series of books. They've turned it into a maybe not great TV series, but what drew you to that vision?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big science fiction fan. Used to read a lot when I was younger. I think the Foundation series is very interesting in the sense that there were so many. I don't know. It was, I would say, maybe the thing that was most amazing for me was the scale of what happened in the series, right? This massive, galactic, I guess, empire, right? And the fact that Asimov was kind of able to weave, drama and an interesting story, at the same time that doing this amazing world building. I don't know. I always thought it was super, super interesting. And also, I mean, later in the series, right, when kind of the I guess the history of Earth is forgotten, right? How they go back and try to figure out all those things. I thought it was I don't know, very fascinating to me. Also the fact that, well, one of the main concepts in the series is this ability to somehow predict the future, right? Using product history, right? I think it was called in the series, and I always thought it was very interesting coming from a mathematics background. How many times we can use mathematics or science to predict very complex phenomena, but something like how humans are going to behave, right, becomes so complicated, right? Um, so I don't know. I thought that was a very interesting concept, and I wonder if at some point in the future we'll get to a point where we can really predict what humans or groups
Yeah.
of people or countries can actually do.
Yeah, very cool. And so going back to Google, any like great stories? You were there for a long time. I mean, you probably were hanging out with the founders, and give us a good story.
Yeah, yeah, not so much, not so much. So when I joined, it was 2008, and Google was actually much smaller than it is today. I think it was about 20,000 people. And by the time that I left, it was probably close to 200,000, something like that. Actually, all of cloud was um, bigger than so cloud by itself. By the time that I left, was bigger than all of Google when I joined.
Wow.
So Google went through a massive, massive transformation. And even my 7 years within cloud, I saw tremendous growth from like a few thousand people to I don't know, like a massive, multi tens of thousands of people, many billions of dollars. Um, and one thing that I remember from my early years there was that even though Google was already a fairly big company, it felt very small. It was possible to go and reach out to almost anybody within the company and like go and meet them for coffee or whatever, right? So
Mhm.
I actually never had a meeting with Larry or Sergey, but I definitely saw them, right? Like in like TGIF, right, which was a kind of meeting that we used to do every Friday, right, with the founders. And I thought that was super super interesting, right? Like how to have a really large organization, but keep it fast moving, keep it small and nimble. I think it was very interesting, for example, how over the past couple of years, right, we've seen OpenAI and other folks come up with language models, right? And the one company that has been able to keep up with the speed was Google. And if you actually look at what Google has been doing with Gemini and the Nano Banana image models and Gemini language models and so on and so forth, Google is the one company that really seems to be innovating at the same speed, whereas Microsoft, for example, hasn't been able to do that. Amazon hasn't been able to do that. Apple, we're still waiting for, what's the next Siri, right, and so on and so forth. But Google is so much faster moving than I think pretty much any other large tech company. And I think part of it was because of the culture.
Yeah. Well, Apple just fired the entire Siri team for like the third time. So good luck with that. Now let's talk about Pauling AI. What's the? I mean, besides obviously you're doing some things that may have been related at Google, but what's the origin story?
Yeah, not so much related, I would say. But the I my last 3 years within Google, I was basically trying to think about um, how to make the biggest impact or the biggest difference in basically bringing new medicines to the world, right? Like, helping cure diseases, doing something that was a little bit more meaningful than what I was doing before. And as part of that, I spent quite a bit of time working with a variety of different companies, right? So, for example, I spent some time with Meditech, the EHR vendor, and built one of the first, I think, systems that use language models to process EHR data. So we did that jointly with Meditech. maybe 3.5 years ago, which is ancient history in the context of language models.
Mm-hmm.
And I spent some time, briefly working with Schrodinger, for example, which is a software tool that is used for drug discovery, and Roivant as well. So, medium-sized biotech company in the U.S., and a few others. And as part of that, I explored what types of things, what type of tools, what type of technology could be useful to accelerate, basically how we find and test new molecules and medicines, how we bring them to clinical trials, how we, get those trials completed, how do we, get those, drugs approved, and then eventually become part of the standard of care and part of the things that doctors can actually give to patients and make a real meaningful impact in people's lives. And I was very lucky that I was able to work across many different things across that entire spectrum. And eventually I kind of honed on the idea that the biggest problem was in the translation between a scientific idea and testing that idea in meaningful conditions, right? So scientists, for example, they're very, very good at coming with hypotheses, right? You talk with the scientists, say, well, we have this specific disease, like how would we tackle it? And I think people are very good at saying, well, here's this target that we could, target meaning a protein, that is involved in that specific, disease, for example, or some other, kind of, way to modify that or to perturb, a certain cell or whatnot. Scientists can come up with all sorts of different potential targets, all sorts of different mechanisms, all sorts of different, kind of therapeutic modalities, which are the molecules that you actually use for those targets. And that is not really complicated, right? Like people have, or scientists, have a lot of imagination for doing those things. But then, of course, you cannot test everything. There are literally millions and millions of potential things that you could use. So how do you pick the ones that are more likely to work? And that process traditionally is very slow and very expensive. But the good thing is that we can automate a lot of that stuff with computers, right? Like we can run simulations that are quick, and that they tell us, this may work or this may not work. So as a scientist, right? Like, you could grab a scientist, tell them, let's work on this specific disease. You could have a million different hypotheses, right? But then every time that you want to test one of those hypotheses, you basically have to spend tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars every time, right? So a new molecule, would have to be synthesized, a new idea for a target, you would have to develop an assay, you would have to do all sorts of different things just to evaluate whether is this, reasonable or not, right? Like not even to come up with a medicine, right? Like that is many years down the road, but just to evaluate, is this interesting or not? So the main idea that spawned polling was, can we use computer simulations to try to go from the idea to a molecule and a way to test that, and to do that in a fully automated way using language models for automation, which I'd love to go in a little bit more depth. Right, in my mind, this is the big benefit of language models is to be able to do automation. But the idea was to use automation to test a lot of these ideas, to get that kind of first pass between something that could be beneficial to having a little bit of proof that indicates that idea could be especially interesting.
Yeah, it's super cool. Are there any particular breakthroughs that you could tell us about that are super exciting right now for the audience?
Yeah, not yet. So we're not ready to announce. We have a bunch of different collaborations with academic
Hmm.
and other partners. We're working on a wide variety of different therapeutic areas or diseases, but we're not ready to announce yet what we're working on. But the world of AI for science in general,
Hmm.
already had quite a few interesting successes, right? So if you look at the Google AI scientists, for example, they're taking a slightly different approach, but they were able to come up with drugs that can be repurposed for certain
Hmm.
types of cancer. If you look at the work of Future House and now Edison Scientific, it's a research institute. that has built very very powerful language models for scientific research. They have been able to come up with novel, interesting ideas. I think in the context of chemistry and material science. So we're kind of operating within the same space, and we're hoping that next year we'll be able to announce some of the early results of the work that we're doing. But it's still a little bit early. So it's been basically a couple of months since we launched the first version of our tool and put it in front of customers working on real drug discovery projects, right? As opposed to, just test data
Yeah,
and test users.
super exciting. And what ethical considerations are you thinking about as you do all this drug discovery?
I would say first of all, this is one of the most worthwhile use cases for AI, right? I think
Absolutely.
few people would disagree with that. Even though the technology, of course, can be used for a variety of different things, using it to find new medicines and then to help scientists take those ideas for medicines uh, into the lab and then eventually into the clinic. I think is one of the most positive uses for technology.
Mhm.
Um, at the same time, right, like a lot of this technology could be used for other things as well, right? Like,
Yeah.
so I think there's a little bit of concern in some circles around bioterrorism and things like that. I think OpenAI was in the news a few weeks ago because they funded this company called Redwing Bio, if I remember right. That
Hmm.
basically does or is trying to build language models that would, I guess, protect against bioterrorism.
Mm.
So a lot of the technology, I think, in that sense, is it's possible to misuse. But at the same time, I think we are still many years away from having real risk within that space. So I think when language models originally came out, lots of people were saying, well, what if you as the model, could you explain how to build a bomb, right? Or could you explain how to,
Yeah.
create some, nasty chemical? And People can do that today, right? Like if you go to you can find a jailbreak for OpenAI and then get ChatGPT to explain to you how to make a simple bomb, right? Like people can do that today. But I think the risk was a little bit overhyped because you can also go to a university library and read a book in
Yeah.
chemistry and learn how to do that yourself, right? So I think maybe they lower a little bit the effort for doing those things, but I think there's still a big gap between the knowledge and somebody actually taking the action. So I think the risks in that sense have been a little bit overhyped. Like to be clear, there are lots and lots of risks with different AI tools and language models and content generation and so on and so forth in other areas. But I think within the context of AI for science, the risks are a little bit lower than people speculate.
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of risks, like you say, around AI. Are there, so what other risks outside of your job, your role, are you concerned about bigger picture?
Yeah, I think the biggest one by far is that content generation has reached a point where it's almost indistinguishable from reality.
Yeah.
Where, especially for people that are not necessarily used to it, that are not experts in the space, where images, for example, are it's very hard today to figure out if an image is AI generated or if it's real. Videos are getting really hard to distinguish as well. And I think over the next few years, we're going to see more and more fully AI generated content. So reviews on websites, for example, it's very hard to figure out if they are real or not, right? Because you could have, a video review of somebody, right? You click on it, look at it, they're playing with the product or whatever, it looks real. It may be 100%, AI generated. Of course, political ads, for example, right? Yeah, it's entirely possible today, right? With an open source model, for example, to generate some ad of a political figure doing something that you know that they didn't do in reality or whatnot, right? So I think we're getting to a point where it's very very hard to separate fact from fiction, right? Again, especially for people that are outside of the technology, right? I think, for myself, I've played a little bit with some of these technologies, and I think I can still, distinguish when something is real from not. But I think people that are, maybe a little bit older, people that haven't been up to date with the state of the art, they will definitely not be able to distinguish one thing from another, which of course opens the door to all sorts of, scams, right?
Yeah, of course. And look, for turning to our advice section, for a CEO in traditional pharma considering AI and AI integration, what's one thing they should know before diving into AI and healthcare?
Yeah, I would say um, this is an area where the state of the art, the technology is moving very fast. It's hard to catch up, or even keep up without dedicating substantial time and resources. I think maybe a few years ago we saw quite a few efforts from traditional pharma. Um, when AlphaFold came out, for example, trying to use the technology or whatnot, and I think it's turning out that only well prepared, well funded, full of high quality research labs can actually do meaningful contributions.
Yeah.
So I think for traditional pharma, which in many cases had trouble hiring, best of
Mhm.
breed kind of researchers and teams. Partnering with other folks, maybe the right path forward. If you look at um, if you look at other industries that have been disrupted by tech, I think the path forward would be to avoid that would be basically partnering with other folks that may have the deep expertise and know-how to be able to kind of create some of these state of the art models, right? Um, it's not happy, right? But many other industries have done it successfully, right? E-commerce, for example, right? Many retailers were disrupted many years ago, and then they realized that they had to kind of get up to speed, and lots of companies emerged along the way to kind of help them with that. And now e-commerce is a really vibrant kind of sector, right? With lots of competition. uh, Whereas in other cases, sectors were kind of disrupted by technology. Traditional movie studios, right? It's the first thing that comes to mind, right? I think, I mean, I don't know when somebody will be listening to this, but one of the biggest news this week was Netflix is apparently going to buy Warner Brothers, right?
Yep.
So, you could argue that in many ways the entertainment industry was disrupted, right? And maybe that's something that they could have been. That could have been prevented, right? So I would say within the context of life sciences and pharma, um, I would look at who and how to partner with some of these folks that are driving the field forward, from the research and from the engineering side, instead of just trying to build everything from scratch.
Yeah. And look, you've got a lot of regulators around the world who are very focused on healthcare regulation, and now they're also focused on AI. Any advice to the policymakers and regulators? Like, how can they help?
Yeah, that is a very complicated question. um,
Yeah.
I mean, I think the work of a regulator is becoming more complex these days, and it's hard to say. Which regulators are more ready for some of these things.
Mhm.
um, I think maybe in the US, for example, we have seen some positive steps. The FDA has been more open about avoiding animal studies and doing studies on organoids or cell on a chip, basically organ on a chip, kind of systems. Uh, using only computational methods, when it makes sense, and so on and so forth. I'm not sure there are great examples around the world. China, is maybe the most obvious one. The Chinese government has been putting lots of money and resources and making it easier for companies within the Chinese ecosystem to progress faster. And as a result, they can do clinical trials, for example, much faster than American companies can.
Hmm.
So maybe there's something that could be copied from them. Um, Apart from that, Yeah, I'm not sure there is a lot of specific advice that I can give to regulators. Definitely not my area of expertise. I have friends, who do this and are experts in public health and so on. But I'm probably not the best person for that job.
Yeah, got you covered. Well, look, we're going to shift to the last section, which is our lightning round. So, as our listeners are aware, I'm going to mention something, and you tell me whether you think it's underrated or overrated and why in a sentence or two, or you can also say fair or pass or whatever. That's fine.
Sure.
So, since you live in Seattle, we'll kick it off with Seattle's art and museum scene, underrated or overrated?
I would say overrated. I just spent some time in Europe, in Vienna,
Oh, yeah.
last month. So I don't think we're kind of up there yet.
We're not there yet. The talking about image to AI, image generation, how realistic the images are today, underrated or overrated?
Underrated, if anything. Most people have
Yeah,
no idea, but it's basically
yeah,
indistinguishable from reality. In the hands of a right, creative, these things are basically just like real today.
amazing. Um, longevity research using AI, underrated or overrated?
Yeah. Underrated. I think there has been quite a bit of progress lately. We're still kind of not there yet, right? But we know more in the longevity space than we did a few years ago, and there are lots of folks that are working on it at the moment and doing really creative things.
Video games as a creative outlet, underrated or overrated?
Underrated. I think people that have don't have a lot of experience playing AAA games, so to say, uh, don't really know how good these things are as kind of creative and narrative experience goes.
Yeah, I mean, there are billion-dollar video games. That's all you need to know, right? Like there, it's part of the culture. Uh, Seattle's weather, underrated or overrated?
I mean, Seattle weather has such a bad reputation. It's kind of hard to be, underrated. But at the same time, it's been raining pretty much nonstop for the past week. So, yeah, I would say it's even worse than people imagine. Overrated.
Uh, Amazon's influence on Seattle, underrated or overrated?
Um, Underrated, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah, Amazon is definitely has changed, especially downtown Seattle over the past 10 years.
Yeah. The Space Needle as a tourist attraction, underrated or overrated?
Overrated, for
And
sure.
then, yeah, and then finally, the movie The Matrix Reloaded, underrated or overrated? So not the first one.
Yeah. Um, it's hard to say. Maybe underrated. I kind of remember all three of them fondly, but yeah, I think the second and the third one, really, got really bad reputation. So, I'll stick with underrated.
All right. Um, Javier, great to have you on the show. Tell us how our listeners can find you on social media if they want to reach out or.
Definitely. So I'm happy to talk with anybody that is interested in for science or tech bio or using AI to improve scientific discovery. I have a Twitter and LinkedIn accounts. Same as most folks. LinkedIn is probably the easiest one to find me and where I'm more active. So happy to connect with anybody and if you google my name probably won't have a lot of issues actually finding me. So thank you for the opportunity, Alec. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, this has been Javier Tordable, CEO and founder of Pauling.AI. And oh, by the way, before we go, you've got to tell people the where you got the name from. Where does Pauling.AI come from?
Definitely, yes. So as we were talking before the show, the name comes from Linus Pauling, who is arguably one of the most important scientists of the 20th century, one of the most important American scientists for sure. He's the only scientist that won two Nobel Prizes without sharing them with anybody. So there are a few others, literally a handful of people that won 2 Nobel Prizes, but he's the only one that won two, and he was the only winner on that year. And he did lots and lots of things, especially in chemistry. And when we were starting a company, I was kind of inspired a little bit by Tesla, for example, which and now everybody knows Tesla the company, and I think people understand, well, there was a scientist before that had the same name. So we kind of try to do the same with Pauling, right? It's in honor of Linus Pauling.
Super awesome. Javier, wonderful to have you on the show. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks again, my pleasure.